This is the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low. The cinema whispers where truths can grow. From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Tonight, Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name.
All right, comrades, we all talk about the forces that shape our world, right? But sometimes I think we forget to look beyond the obvious. We get caught up in the political speeches and the manifestos, and we forget that there are these other stories that are kind of seeping into our collective consciousness.
Right. It's all around us.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're doing something a little different. We're embarking on a deep dive into how conservative ideology, that ever-mutating hydra, finds fertile ground in the heart of capitalist culture itself, cinema.
Fascinating. And a crucial task, I think, to unmask how this worldview, this often, retrograde worldview, finds its way into these stories we consume. I mean, think about it. These narratives we enjoy, they're not just entertainment. They're vehicles for ideology, for these frameworks of power and control.
Absolutely. And we have two really interesting pieces of evidence to help us with this, right?
Yeah.
A history of conservatism, which kind of lays bare the historical trajectory of this ideology, its core impulses, and you know how it's managed to adapt and reassert itself over centuries. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, you see the same patterns again and again.
Mm-hmm. And then alongside that, we have conservative themes in 20 films, which is a really fascinating catalog that exposes specific instances of these historical and ideological currents actually manifesting on the silver screen.
Yeah, and it's not just those, overtly political films.
Right.
We see it everywhere, from the spectacle of Hollywood action to, those heartwarming family dramas. It's pervasive.
That's what's so eye-opening. It's these films that are marketed as pure escapism. They're often the most insidious carriers of this stuff. They subtly reinforce a very particular vision of how society should be structured. So, hierarchical, top down.
It's like a Trojan horse for the ruling class.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here. A history of conservatism, lays out a pretty compelling case. What are the fundamental forces driving this phenomenon?
Well, I think what's really striking is that it's not so much a fixed doctrine. It's more like a persistent reaction against progressive change, a kind of knee-jerk reflex to protect existing power structures.
Always playing defense.
Exactly. And the goal is always the same: to maintain elite control, to preserve those hierarchies, and to resist any real redistribution of power.
So it's not about specific policies as much as this overarching impulse to suppress any movement toward equality.
Right, and that's why it's so slippery. The surface level anxieties, the rallying cries, they evolve over time. You look at the early conservatives, they were all about defending that feudal order. Divine right of kings, the church, the whole shebang.
The old guard.
Exactly. Then in the 19th century, they're grappling with liberalism, the rising tide of socialism. They're terrified of, workers' rights. But sometimes, and this is interesting, they make these tactical concessions. They adopt some limited reforms, like state-sponsored welfare in Bismarck's Germany.
To kind of let the steam out of the pressure cooker.
Exactly. It's a way to quell those radical demands and preserve the fundamental power imbalance.
Clever.
Right. Then, as we move into the late 19th, early 20th century, things get really dangerous. This is where conservatism starts to get tangled up with this aggressive nationalism, imperial expansion, these pseudo-scientific justifications for racial hierarchies.
Slippery slope.
Yeah, and it culminates in fascism, which is just pure barbarism.
Right, and then, of course, after World War II, we see a different kind of conservatism emerging.
Yeah, they align themselves with the capitalist West against the perceived threat of communism.
The Red Scare.
Right. And they cloak themselves in this language of freedom and Christian morality.
Yes, the moral majority.
Precisely. And then comes neoliberalism, which really takes off in the late 20th century. This idea that, the free market will solve all our problems. Deregulation, dismantling the welfare state.
All under this guise of individual freedom.
It's insidious.
It really is. And that brings us to the mess we find ourselves in today.
Aye. Sadly, yes. We see a resurgence of this reactionary populism, this obsession with divisive culture wars.
Oh, culture wars.
Yeah, it's a way to obscure the real issues, you know, the economic inequalities, the systemic injustices, and it's a dangerous trajectory. We see these anti-democratic tendencies creeping and these attempts to control the narrative through technology.
It's a bleak picture.
It is. But we have to understand it if we want to fight back.
Okay, so let's bring all this historical context to bear on the film, shall we?
Let's do it.
Conservative themes in 20 films identify several key categories. Let's start with classic and political conservatism. And right off the bat, we have Dirty Harry. Talk about a pin to authoritarianism. What's going on there?
Right off the bat, it's that classic conservative trope, Law and Order, you know, Harry Callahan, he's the hero, but he operates outside the law. He's above the system.
Yeah, that whole vigilante justice thing.
Exactly. And the film frames this as a good thing. It says, look, the system is broken. Liberal policies are too lenient. We need a strong man to come in and clean things up.
It's a very seductive message, especially when you're feeling afraid or insecure.
It is. And it taps into that deep-seated conservative distrust of anything that challenges traditional hierarchies.
So the ends justify the means.
Right. As long as those means are being wielded by the right people. Okay, next up we have Red Dawn, another classic.
Oh yeah, a true Cold War relic.
This film is pure anti-communist paranoia. You know, a bunch of plucky American teenagers fighting off a Soviet invasion. It's like a fever dream of conservative anxieties.
It's so over the top, but that's what makes it so effective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It taps into this fear of external threats, this idea that America is constantly under siege, and it glorifies armed self-reliance.
The American way?
Right. And of course, it completely ignores the complexities of the Cold War. It's a very black and white good versus evil narrative.
Which is very typical of conservative thinking, right?
Absolutely. They need a clear enemy to rally against.
And speaking of clear enemies, we have Rocky IV.
Ah, yes. Another Cold War gem.
This one's not even subtle about its ideology.
No, it's pure American exceptionalism versus Soviet collectivism. Rocky, the all-American hero, triumphs over the monolithic, dehumanized Soviet system. It's propaganda, plain and simple.
Yeah, the message is clear. Individualism good, collectivism bad.
Exactly. And it reinforces this idea that America is the beacon of freedom and democracy, while the Soviet Union is this oppressive, evil empire.
Okay, so let's jump forward a few decades. We have The Dark Knight listed here, a superhero film.
Yeah, this one's interesting.
You wouldn't think it would be a hotbed of conservative ideology, but
But it is.
yeah. How does that work?
Well, on the surface, it's just a fun, action-packed superhero movie. But beneath that, there's this subtle argument for the curtailment of civil liberties in the name of security.
Yeah, Batman's whole surveillance system.
Exactly. And the film makes it seem like, you know, maybe that's necessary. Maybe we need to sacrifice some of our freedoms to protect ourselves from the bad guys.
Because the ends justify the means.
Right. It's a very slippery slope. And it's a theme that runs throughout conservative thought. The idea that order and security are more important than individual rights.
It's kind of chilling when you think about it.
It is, especially in today's world where we see this constant erosion of privacy and civil liberties. Okay, next up we have American Sniper, a more recent film, but still very much steeped in conservative ideology.
Yeah, this one really glorifies military service.
It does, and it presents this very simplistic black and white view of the Iraq War.
Good guys versus bad guys.
Exactly. And it reinforces this idea that America is always right, always fighting for good. It's a very patriotic film.
Yeah, and it plays into this myth of the heroic soldier, the warrior who sacrifices everything for his country.
Right. And it doesn't really engage with the complexities of the conflict. It doesn't question the motives behind the war or the consequences of American intervention.
It just reinforces this blind faith in American military might.
Exactly. And speaking of controversial films about the war on terror, we have Zero Dark 30.
Yeah, this one really stirred things up.
It did. Because it portrays the use of torture by the CIA.
And not in a very critical way.
Right. It presents it as a necessary evil, a way to get information and protect the country.
Which is a very dangerous message.
It is. And it reflects this this dark side of conservative thinking, this idea that anything is justified in the name of national security.
Okay, so let's move on to another category, individualism and self-reliance. This is really at the heart of conservative ideology, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's this belief that individuals are responsible for their own success or failure, and that government intervention is always a bad thing.
The bootstrap myth.
Right. And we see this reflected in a lot of films. For example, Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump, really?
Yeah. On the surface, it's just a sweet, heartwarming story. But if you look closer, it's actually reinforcing a lot of conservative ideas.
Like what?
Well, Forrest is successful because he's hardworking, patriotic, and just kind of blindly optimistic. He doesn't question authority. He just goes with the flow.
And he achieves the American dream.
Right. And the film contrasts this with the counterculture movement, which is portrayed as being kind of chaotic and unproductive.
So the message is, if you just work hard and follow the rules,
Yeah.
you'll be successful.
Exactly. And it completely ignores the systemic barriers that people face, poverty, racism, sexism. It's just this feel-good myth that ignores the reality of social injustice.
And the pursuit of happiness takes us even further.
Absolutely. It's like the ultimate ode to self-reliance. Chris Gardner overcomes incredible odds to achieve success. But the film completely downplays the role of systemic factors. It's all about his individual grit and determination.
Which is a very comforting narrative for the ruling class, right?
It is, because it absolves them of any responsibility for social problems.
And it puts all the blame on the individual.
Exactly. And then we have Cinderella Man, which is another interesting case.
This one's set during the Great Depression, right?
It is, and it celebrates James J. Braddock's perseverance and resilience in the face of economic hardship, but it also kind of implicitly criticizes government intervention.
Yeah, there's this sense that people should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Right, which is a very conservative viewpoint. They
Right.
believe that individuals should be self-reliant and that government assistance makes people weak and dependent.
Okay, so even Captain America isn't immune to this individualistic ideology. Nope. Captain America, the first Avenger, is all about traditional masculinity, patriotism, and American exceptionalism.
The perfect soldier.
Exactly. And he's a symbol of individual heroism, of course. One man standing up for what's right, even against impossible odds.
The powerful myth.
It is. And it reinforces this idea that individuals can make a difference, even within a corrupt system.
Okay, let's move on to another category, traditional values and masculinity. And we have Gran Torino listed here, which is a really fascinating film.
Yeah, this one's a bit of a mixed bag.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, it's a critique of racism and xenophobia.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood's character is this grumpy old racist who learns to overcome his prejudices.
Right. But on the other hand, the film also romanticizes this very traditional, almost toxic form of masculinity.
Yeah, he's this tough, stoic, self-reliant guy who doesn't show any emotion.
Exactly. And he's very skeptical of progressive values.
So it's kind of a contradictory film. It is. It's both progressive and conservative at the same time.
And even animated films aren't safe from this ideological scrutiny. The Incredibles is listed here.
Yeah, this one's interesting because it argues against the idea of enforced equality.
How so?
Well, the villain, Syndrome, wants to give everyone superpowers. He wants to level the playing field.
Which sounds like a good thing, right?
But the film frames it as a bad thing because it takes away from the specialness of the truly exceptional people.
So it's basically saying that some people are just better than others.
Right. And that we shouldn't try to make everyone equal.
Which is a very hierarchical way of thinking.
It is. And it reflects this conservative fear of anything that challenges the status quo.
Okay, let's move on to Troy. What conservative themes are we seeing in this ancient epic?
Well, it's all about honor, glory, and warrior culture.
Classic masculine values.
Exactly. And it also celebrates a very hierarchical social structure.
Yeah.
Kings and heroes are at the top and everyone else is below them.
So it's reinforcing this idea that some people are just born to lead.
Right. And that we should respect and obey those in positions of authority.
And Rambo. First Blood Part 2 also fits into this category.
It does. It's a classic example of a film that tries to rewrite history to make America look good.
Yeah, it basically erases the trauma of the Vietnam War and turns it into a story of American heroism.
Exactly. And it glorifies violence and militarism.
Which is very typical of conservative filmmaking.
It is. They love to celebrate American military might. Okay, finally, we have Braveheart.
Another historical epic.
This one celebrates nationalism, rebellion against government control, and traditional warrior masculinity, all themes that resonate with certain conservative viewpoints.
Okay, let's move on to our final categories. Christian and religious conservatism, and nationalism and anti-liberalism. And we have the Passion of the Christ listed here.
This one is a very visceral and uncompromising portrayal of Christian martyrdom and traditional religious values.
It's a very powerful film, even if you're not religious.
It is, and it aligns with specific conservative interpretations of Christian theology.
And then we have God's Not Dead, which is a more modern take on religious conservatism.
This one portrays Christians as a persecuted group, battling against a hostile secular world.
It's a very common narrative within the religious right.
It is, and it's often used to justify discrimination against LGBTQ plus people and other marginalized groups.
And even the Chronicles of Narnia gets a mention here.
Yeah, those films are full of Christian allegory. Aslan is basically Jesus.
Okay, moving on to nationalism and anti-liberalism, we have The Patriot.
This one glorifies American exceptionalism, gun ownership, and resistance to government overreach.
All classic conservative themes.
Absolutely. And it portrays the American Revolution in a very simplistic black and white way.
Good guys versus bad guys.
Exactly. And finally, we have Top Gun.
This one is just pure military propaganda.
It is. It glorifies hypermasculinity, nationalistic fervor, and American military supremacy.
It's a recruitment tool, basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of conservative themes in cinema.
Wow. That was a lot. But it's so important to understand how these things are being used to shape our culture.
Absolutely. Because once you start to see these patterns, you can't unsee them.
Yeah, it's like you've been given a new pair of glasses.
Exactly. And it's our responsibility to use this knowledge to challenge these ideologies and fight for a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. So, for you, dear listener, as you've journeyed with us through this deep dive into the ideological heart of Hollywood, we trust you've gained some new insights. By understanding the historical evolution of conservative thought, we can begin to decode those underlying messages within the films we consume.
And this exploration is just the beginning.
Exactly. We encourage you to keep questioning, keep analyzing, and keep fighting for a better world. And remember, comrades, these films, these narratives, they're not just entertainment. They're battlegrounds in the ongoing struggle for ideological dominance.
This raises a crucial question. As you reflect on these connections between cinema and the insidious creep of conservative ideology, what other films might reveal similar ideological undercurrents when subjected to this kind of historical and materialist analysis? And how does this newfound understanding impact your own interpretation and engagement with these cultural products?
Very important questions to consider. This has been a special deep dive into the ideological battleground of cinema from Marxists at the movies.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low.
Thank you for listening to the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Cinema whispers
Don't
where
forget to
truths
like
can
and comment.
grow.